Welcome to Get Paid for Your Pad, the definitive show on Airbnb hosting, featuring the best advice on how to maximize profits from your Airbnb listing, as well as real-life experiences from Airbnb hosts all over the world. Welcome. We are your hosts, Josefa Kapadia and Jasper Rivers.
Get paid for your pad. 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 Get paid for your pad.
Welcome everybody, another episode of Get Paid for Your Pad, number 68. And it's a special episode because today I'm with Josefa, and he hasn't been around for a while, so I'm excited that he's back on the show. Josefa, how's it going?
Good. Hi everybody, how's it going? Good to be back.
And today we have a very special guest. His name is Seth Porges, and he's Hey Seth, how you doing?
I'm good.
I was going to say he's quite well known in the U.S. He's been on several TV shows. He's written for some big magazines. So without further ado, Seth, welcome to the show. And
thanks for having me, and thanks for the intro.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I actually run a startup called Cloth, and it's an app in the App Store. If you have an iOS device, you can give it a download. It's a fashion app. And over the years, I've been a magazine editor, written for numerous major magazines, and been on a couple of television shows, mostly on Travel Channel, National Geographic, History Channel, those kind of shows. So you might have seen me.
Awesome. And you have also been hosting on Airbnb for quite a long time, correct?
Yeah, I think it's been 2010 when I began, so 5 years now.
Well, back then, there weren't that many hosts. I'm just writing a big post about the history of Airbnb and how they got started. And it took a while before they got some traction. At the beginning, nobody wanted to invest. Everybody thought it was crazy. So you must have been one of the early hosts. So do you remember what it was like back in the day to host on Airbnb?
Yeah, the biggest change was that nowadays you can say the word Airbnb and people know what you're talking about. Back then, I had to explain to people what I was doing. And then, of course, there'd be inevitably questions, why? Or isn't that dangerous? Or how? Or that doesn't make any sense. But nowadays, it's become so common that, the mystery is all gone. And that's sort of the biggest change. But, Airbnb, it came onto the scene. And you're right. Like, at first, not many people really got it. And people like myself, I think we really saw that this was going to be something big because we were shoehorning Airbnb out of other platforms, whether that was Craigslist or word of mouth or whatever it was. There was this desire for people to rent rooms on a short-term basis and to stay in rooms on a short-term basis. But without a platform like Airbnb, it was actually just very, very difficult to do. What Airbnb did is it came and they, in many ways, legitimized the practice, and they made it safer and cleaner and neater and easier.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about your initial listing, or what city was it in? What was kind of like the style, the type of the place?
Yeah, sure. My initial listing is the same listing I have now. I've lived there for a number of years. And, it's a 2-bedroom place. It's a duplex. And so it's actually really well situated for Airbnb because there's a ton of privacy. My bedroom is on one floor. The guest room is on a separate floor. It's really awesome for this. And I had this extra room, and I didn't really want a full-time roommate. If you've ever had a roommate, inevitably you guys kind of get on each other's nerves. They have all their stuff. There's all these reasons I didn't want another roommate, but I didn't want the room to go to waste. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I could rent it out for people for maybe like a month at a time, sort of like a short-term basis. And I realized, if you're a traveler and you're coming to New York, unless you have unlimited money or an expense account, you can't really stay at a hotel for more than a couple days. It's just prohibitively expensive. And hostels, are also rather expensive in New York and not really the friendliest places. And finding sublets is so painful in New York. It's just really hard to do. And I thought, man, I really wish there was an easier way to match make this. And so at first, I put the room out on Craigslist before we'd ever heard of Airbnb, looking for short-term sublets that would stay maybe a month at a time or a couple weeks at a time. And I did this a couple times and had a pretty okay experience. Nothing really bad happened, but there are all these sort of flaws in the system. Inevitably somebody would check in, and then a couple days later they go, oh yeah, my friend is staying here too. And there's really nothing you can do about it. Or simply the act of asking them for money was really awful and painful, because you kind of want to be their friend and suddenly you're asking them for several $100s in cash. It gets really weird. And when Airbnb came along, it actually just instantly solved all these problems. Suddenly, they were handling the transaction, the financial side of it, so you never actually have to ask anybody for money, which is really, really, it's hard to overstate how important that is to the process. But most important of all, they had reviews. And when you take a guest off Craigslist or word of mouth or anything else, you're hoping they're great. And oftentimes they are great. And even the best guests, though, without a form of accountability, they're really not under any incentive to maybe clean up as much as they will, or sort of act on the best behavior. But with the review system at Airbnb, and this goes both ways with hosts and guests, you have this built-in incentive for people to just act nice to each other. And it kind of codifies this social interaction into a highly positive manner. And I think really it's sort of this invisible hand that kind of guides human behavior in Airbnb setting, but simply the presence of the review system and the fact that there is some accountability just makes guests who normally would be good great. And that's a really important part of the process.
It's interesting you mentioned the payment mechanism. I also tutor kids in math and other subjects on a platform using a platform called Wisant, and that is so important. The fact that Wisant essentially handles the payment so it's seamless. You don't have to, again, ask for payment or request a check. And man, I can't tell you how much simpler life is when you have that. And the same is true absolutely for Airbnb. It's all done kind of behind the scenes. You don't have to deal with it, and yeah, it makes things very nice. When you first got your listing going in New York, was there instant demand on Airbnb, or was it something that slowly gained momentum?
Yeah, I never really had any problems keeping my place booked. There was instant demand, and I think, of course, there weren't nearly as many people searching for places to stay in Airbnb 5 years ago as there are today, but there also weren't as many hosts. And so as demand has grown, supply has grown as well, and I have no idea which has grown faster, honestly. But in the early days, it wasn't difficult to get bookings because there just weren't many bookings as competition. One thing I have noticed change over the years, though, is the type of person who uses Airbnb. In the beginning, it really was a much more casual, almost couch surfing type customer. But nowadays, it's people who are kind of using it, instead of hotels often, and a lot of business travelers. And so in the early days, I think expectations were a little bit lower. Maybe you didn't have to be as diligent about making sure every surface was wiped down. Nowadays, you really do have to provide almost a hotel-like experience because people expect it. And the type of person who uses Airbnb is a lot more of a mainstream traveler. It's not simply people who are sort of upgrading from the world of couch surfing.
Yeah, and I think you see that with a lot of online platforms. In the beginning, it's the early adopters who jump on board, and they just love the concept, so they're not going to be very critical about the platform, because I know back in the day, the site was very different. It didn't have all the options that it has now. Like nowadays, you have a pricing tool. The pictures are all really nice. And as a host, you can see all sorts of data and stuff. But when you started, it must have been a pretty basic website.
It was basic, but the evolution of the site has been gradual enough that I couldn't even tell you what the differences are between back then and now, if you ask me. There were a couple, there still is some competition in this space. I mean, back then, though, Airbnb wasn't the dominant player. It wasn't the Kleenex, the name brand, the Coca-Cola of the space. And some people I knew who were kind of experimenting with short-term rentals were cross-listing on numerous spaces. And I think one of the reasons that Airbnb kind of won out in the end in many ways and is the default platform for this is that their site always looked pretty good. It was always a really nice, appealing, very clean design site. And that's really, really key for this, because it makes your place look better. It makes the entire experience welcoming. And what they did is they took this, what was sort of this gray market, semi-shady activity, and they brought it into the open, and they made it safer, cleaner, neater. In order to that, they really did need a good-looking site. And a lot of their early team were design people, my understanding is. And so I think they really, from an early stage, understood the importance of good design in this.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I started, I actually listed on a different platform. At the same time, I was using Window as well as Airbnb. And I looked at all the others, HomeAway, and there's a bunch of others, VRBO. But I just felt like the other ones just didn't look as good. And
Yep.
also, it just looked kind of old-fashioned, when you look away. When you look at Airbnb, you immediately feel like, okay, this is in line with the current trends.
You're right, and I think you are far from alone in that. Back then, again, before Airbnb was the default option, it was somewhat arbitrary what platform you would list on. And talking around, I found some people would list on different platforms, and they found they could get a little bit more money from Airbnb for the same listing just because it felt more upscale. And that, it's a very well-run company with really smart people at top who've done an amazing job of hustling to make their platform what it is today. But you really can't dismiss the simple fact that good design played a huge part in them getting initial traction.
So you mentioned before that you one of the reasons why you chose Airbnb over a fixed term lease is because it's preferable to having a roommate. Have you also looked at the numbers as far as the breakdown? Like, are you making it, is it more profitable essentially to do it the way you're doing it, or does it come out about even, or have you looked into that at all?
Sure, it's 100% more profitable. I mean, just the way the world works, if it's like buying anything in bulk at Costco. If you buy more of it, whether it's days of an apartment or anything else, you pay less in the long run. So if I sell a whole bunch of short-term rentals, I can certainly make more money. But it's not why I do it. It's not why certainly it's more lucrative, which is nice. But I do it because it's more fun than having a roommate. I get to meet more people, more cool people. If somebody turns out to be kind of a drag, which rarely happens, they're gone in a week. It's not a big deal. If you pick a roommate and it doesn't work out, well, you're kind of stuck with them. And that's kind of unfortunate. Like I just didn't want a roommate. I didn't want to feel like I was sharing an apartment with somebody. I wanted to feel like it was my apartment. And I felt it was this like romantic notion of being an innkeeper, I guess. I think when I first started doing this, I was really, it was really appealing to me in the same way I think a lot of people have these fantasies of moving away to the countryside and opening a bed and breakfast. It was the same thing, but in a much more manageable scale. The idea that I could have this open door and all these awesome, cool people could come through and I could meet people from all over the world. And that certainly hasn't disappointed in that respect. It's been this incredible just tool for meeting awesome people who are a part of my life now, friends in all sorts of cities. And in a roommate, that's just not possible.
Can you give us a story of somebody really, I'm sure you have dozens, maybe more, but can you give us the first story that comes to mind of a really awesome or incredible person that you met through Airbnb?
A number of people who have actually ended up working with me on Cloth, my app, I actually met via Airbnb. One of my tech guys I met just a guest at Airbnb. One of my now friends who kind of helping me with a lot of the business strategy and partnerships, all that stuff, he was a guest. It's been this incredible business networking tool in many ways. It's a really nice way to kind of penetrate outside your own bubble and meet people you just normally would never come across. And that's really fun.
What's really interesting, most hosts that we talk to, they hear about Airbnb first, and then they start considering listing their place. But for you, it was the other way around. You weren't happy
absolutely
with your current situation, and you were actually looking for an alternative. And how did you find out about Airbnb?
That's a great question. I think I might have seen one of the early news stories about it. It was, before I had ever heard of Airbnb, as I said, I was listing my place on Craigslist for short-term rentals. And as I mentioned, it didn't really work. And when I saw Airbnb, it just instantly clicked to me as here is the solution to every single point-by-point problem I have. And that was really, I thought, what's the harm in trying it out? Where did I actually hear about it for the first time? Part of me thinks it was a New York Daily News article from 2010 or 2009 in which the writer rented an Airbnb, which was literally like a tent on somebody's rooftop in Manhattan. And I thought, like, oh, this is it. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And, no turning back since then.
Yeah, for me, it was kind of a similar thing. I was renting out on the long term, and I was traveling a lot, so I could never stay at my own place. And also, I was worried that my renter wouldn't leave if I would ever move back or want to move back, right? And so for me, it solved three problems. It's flexibility. I can stay in my house when I want. It's the extra income. And I'm guaranteed that the guests are leaving. I'm never going to be stuck in a situation where I need to go to court to get my renter out of my house.
Absolutely, and that is a serious issue in some cities, that it's very difficult to kick somebody out.
Yeah, exactly. And for example, in Holland, it's almost impossible if the person has stayed more than a year. I think you literally have to go to court, even though it doesn't matter what the contract says.
Yeah,
and we actually had a person on the podcast a while ago. Her name was Ellie, and she's from Australia, and she was in real estate, and she had like 10 properties or so. And at some point, she had 2 or 3 people at the same time who weren't paying rent. And she actually did go to court to get those people out. And it turned out to be such a pain in the ass. She lost out on 2 or 3 months of rent per property, so she lost a lot of money. And then she literally took all her properties and put them on Airbnb, and now she's got like 10 Airbnb listings basically.
Yeah.
So it's it also reminds me of our very first interview that we had with our friend Chris, who was renting out in Canada, and he had a really awful roommate, and so he got so sick of it that after his roommate left, he never wanted to sublet again. So let's talk about your listing a little bit. I had a look, and the first thing I noticed was that you've got a lot of Q&A on your description.
Yeah,
I thought that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think I stole that from some other listing I came across. You find if you host an Airbnb for any length of time, you get the same questions asked to you again and again and again. And I thought, all right, I'll just put them up front. And it has saved me so many hours just in terms of writing the same answers again and again and again to people.
Now, when you have guests check in, do you normally sit down with them, have a cup of coffee with them, and get to know them, or is it a case by case thing that you sort of evaluate?
No, sure. When guests check in, what I like to do is just take 5 minutes to show them around the apartment and kind of show them, like, oh, here's the hot water machine. Here's how you drink water. Like, here's how, all the little quirks in your place that kind of need explanation. Here's the outlet where if you tug too hard, it could fly off the wall, and it's a good way to kind of get acquainted with them and show them, oh, here's a really cool place, but here's how you kind of make the best use of it. And that's sort of my standard operating procedure. One thing also that you might have noticed in my listing, which is, I think some other people have mimicked since, and maybe I was the first person, I don't know, to do this. I don't know if that's the case, is I put a little code phrase in my listing. If you're a host on Airbnb, you know that you really just want people to read your entire listing before they message you, because oftentimes, you'll have people who message you thinking they're getting the whole apartment, but it's really one room because they just didn't bother to read it. Or they might have a bunch of questions that you find yourself redundantly answering again and again and again. So what I did is I put this code phrase where it says, to prove you have read my listing, just put this at the top of your message. And about 2/3 of my messages, I can instantly see have this code phrase, and I can just at a glance tell this person read my listing or they didn't. And that way, if they don't have the code phrase, I can say, hey, if you could do me a favor and go back and read my listing, I think it might answer any questions you have. And that there does a couple things. It instantly tells me who's read my listing. It saves me from having to answer the same questions again and again and again. And guests kind of like it. It feels like they feel like they won a game when they come across this secret listing. It's kind of fun. But I stole that from David Lee Roth, who famously, according to legend, had these incredibly complex tour riders with all of these details about what color the couches had to be and how the pyrotechnics would work. And he had this one detail in there, which was that he needed a glass full of just brown M&Ms. And the point wasn't that he wanted M&Ms. The point was he wanted to make sure they read the entire thing because there was complex pyrotechnic information. If they didn't, they could have caused an accident. And so we could instantly tell by the presence of M&Ms that they had read the entire tour rider. And so I kind of stole that concept and applied it to my Airbnb listing, where I can instantly tell by the presence of this code phrase whether or not they've read my entire listing. And that's just been, I think, my favorite little hack.
Oh, that's really cool. I've never heard that before. We're planning on doing a series eventually of particular cities, hotspot cities in the U.S., like San Francisco, L.A., where we have almost a roundtable discussion of hosts talking about the places that they like to recommend. Obviously, New York, huge Airbnb city. When you have guests come in, what are some of the places in your neck of the woods that you have to check this out? This is amazing, and this is a great restaurant or a great bar, etc.
Sure. What I've actually done is I created a document that I send them I send people 2 documents before they check in. One is all the information they need for the house. How do you get into the house? Where are the things you need? How does the TV work? What are the basic rules, like shoes or no shoes, that kind of stuff? And then the other document I send them is, here's the cool stuff you should check out. I kind of try to stay away from the obvious things like Central Park or the Empire State Building, because chances are they've heard of those, and kind of veer a little bit more into hidden gem territory, especially things in the immediate vicinity of my apartment. So restaurants or bars or attractions very close to me. I just kind of send them this document, and guests really like it. I think one reason people use Airbnb is because they want sort of a locals experience, for lack of a better term. They want to feel like they're living with the locals and living like the locals and checking out the local stuff. And just creating a simple document that has, a couple of your favorite things either in your neighborhood or hidden throughout the larger city can go a long way towards helping to accomplish that goal without really taking any time on your part. You make the document once and then you email it off.
So do you send this out right when people book, or do you wait until a week before they check in?
I do send it about a week before they check in. It's a way to sort of confirm, if they book 4 months in advance, you want to make sure that you have some contact with them a little bit closer to the check-in, just to see if their travel plans have changed, or to make sure everything's cool and get them excited for their trip. So I send an email about a week before check-in saying, hey, just, confirming your arrival time. Let me know if there's anything you need. Here are these 2 documents. One gives you everything you need to know for the apartment. The other, everything you need to know for the city we're in.
And did you ever come in a situation where people didn't read your guide?
Oh, all the time. And yeah, of course. And so when guests check in, I kind of walk them through anything that's really important about the apartments. Just, if they didn't read a guide that's like, here's a restaurant you should check in, whatever, they missed out. It's not a big deal. What's more important is making sure they understand just the basic rules for the house and how things work around here, so to speak. And that kind of stuff I walk them through again. And I'm sure to say, hey, I put this in the guide, but I find it helpful to walk through it because some people don't read it, and also just in case you have any questions as we go through it. And most guests start nodding their head because, yeah, they read it, but every once in a while, they'll ask questions that kind of reveal that they did not read it or read it a long time ago or forgot it. And so it's just nice to go over things again.
Right.
You can't assume people have read anything.
Yeah. And a couple of weeks ago, and this is the reason why I asked the question. A couple of weeks ago, I happened to be at my own house, which is pretty rare. But I had some guests arriving, and they literally called me the moment they landed at the airport, and they asked me what the address was.
Yeah,
which is funny because I sent them a 22-page guidebook with pictures and directions, and I send them probably 2 or 3 extra emails with the address, and I think you can also see it on the in Airbnb as well.
Yeah.
So now I actually send a separate email telling guests to either print out the guide or just note down the address in their smartphone or on a piece of paper just to make sure that they have it.
Yeah, so you find, one time I had a guest who So you'll find that sometimes guests are a little bit incommunicado when they're traveling. If they're traveling to multiple cities and it's a big worldwide jaunt, especially, they may not be on email much or at all. And so I think it's really important to send it, at least a week in advance, the information, and confirm that they got it. You really need to confirm they got it, because if they're traveling around the world, they may never be checking email. And you need to make sure they have the information. I've literally had a guest who, did not. I sent it 2 weeks before. They didn't hear anything from them. I kept hey, I'm trying to reach you guys. I tried to call them. I tried to contact them through Airbnb. I couldn't reach them. And then, especially because I was away most of that day. And then I get a call from them when they're literally in front of my door saying, why can't we get in? I was like, I sent you 40 emails trying to confirm your information. And I sort of anticipated this would happen and managed to, find a way to get a key to them. But, you really need to confirm to the best of your ability that they understand how to get into your apartment prior, whether you're there or not. That's the most basic thing, I think. Because a lot of people, especially ones who are new to Airbnb, kind of view it like a hotel where they think they can just sort of show up and check in at any time, not really grasping the concept that you need to be there, or your system, whatever it is, needs to be in place for them to check in. And that's something that you really need to communicate the first time Airbnb guests, especially because it's not a hotel where they can check in and there's a front desk agent just waiting for them.
When people make reservations, with your particular listing, do you have instant book enabled?
No, definitely not. It's the reason being, and I don't really turn down many bookings if people bother to, what I find is I try to engage them in a couple of questions back and forth just to make sure, hey, you're a real human being who really wants to stay here and you actually read my listing. Great. That's pretty much, my criteria. And most people who are using Airbnb have an open mind, are really cool, and you don't get too many people who don't really want to stay with you. The reason I don't use Instant Book, rather, is I view my calendar as a jigsaw puzzle. And I'll have, these 3 days that I need to fill because I'm leaving that day at that morning, and then somebody else is coming that next day, and you want to minimize the amount of downtime between them. And there's all of it's like a complex mental calculus that goes into the length of stay you want to fill particular sections in your calendar. And Instant Book, you lose control. If somebody could just say a 3-day booking in the middle of a prime week, well, the rest of that week could be out of commission suddenly. And you really want to, at least I want to kind of stack my bookings really closely together. And I might, for example, have 2 days set as the minimum stay, but really it's a week and I only allow 2-day bookings if there happens to be 2 days between longer stays. And you kind of lose that ability to parse through the details and match up calendar dates as closely and as however you want to when you use Instant Book.
Now, you've hosted how many groups? Probably more than 200-300.
Probably close to around 400.
Okay, cool. So we talked about some of your best experiences, but I would also like to ask you, did it ever go wrong? There must have been some issues at some point, right? And so it's a two-part question. So what happens and how did you solve it?
Sure. Considering the number of bookings I've had remarkably few troubles, basically none major and very few minor. I find that as long as you bother to engage the guests and kind of be communicative with them and set expectations, everybody's pretty cool. Sort of the minor things that I, maybe could have done without, sometimes let me think, for example, you sometimes have guests who are on the needy side, if you will, who, it's not a bad thing, but they'll be constantly texting you and asking you for things. Either that's that they're really kind of unfamiliar with the city and laws, or they kind of still sort of have this hotel mentality where you're at their beck and call. But again, very, very rarely. Other times, the only thing that really jumps out at me is something I could have done without was I had the girl who decided to smoke in the apartment. She was from Italy, I believe, and I guess she didn't quite understand that it's polite to ask people before lighting cigarettes in their house. But once we kind of identified what was going on, she was extremely apologetic.
I think in Italy it's pretty normal to smoke a little bit.
You know,
Smoke there, I guess.
I have friends from Italy, and I asked them about that, and they say you still ask people before lighting in their house. So that was I could have done without that. And when
Well,
I'll tell you also
that's the worst for over 400 stays. Then I think
yeah, I mean, there's really no problems. And again, I don't think anything has been broken more than like an IKEA glass or a plate, and nobody has stolen anything that I'm aware of. And like people ask, like, "Oh, aren't you worried that somebody's going to steal something?" And I say, like, well, you know what? If you're looking to rob somebody, doing it via a service that has their credit card information on file is probably not the best way to go about doing it. And I feel pretty secure with my Airbnb guests, especially because I live there. Maybe I'd be a little bit more cautious about locking things up or hiding things if I was dealing with guests when I was not present. But because I live there, it's a little bit different.
So for all those hosts out there who are thinking of getting already started, what piece of advice or pieces of advice do you have to offer as far as getting a listing off the ground, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. I think what you got to do is be on the ball in terms of replying to messages, because people who send Airbnb messages, they're worried that they're not going to get a place, and if the first person who offers them something, they're often going to go ahead and book. And if you wait a day to get back to somebody, you'll find that somebody else has already taken them in. So you can't dilly-dally. You have to be on the ball. Using the app is really helpful because it can send you an alert when you have an incoming message. So totally do that. Also, set your prices a little bit low at first. It's really, once you get a couple reviews and some momentum, you can raise your prices a little bit. But you need to get those initial reviews and those initial bookings. And lowering your price by a couple dollars is definitely helpful at first, especially because if you, being a new host, don't have any reviews, you'll find that a lot of people are hesitant to stay with you, just as you might be hesitant to take in a guest who doesn't have any reviews. And so I think you really need to kind of take that into account when pricing your place. So that definitely helps. Make sure you're really detailed in your listing, and make sure, even if you haven't had a chance to take advantage of the free photography from Airbnb, which you definitely should do because they send you a great photographer for free to take these photos, which are totally awesome. Make sure that the photos you take before that are good as well. They don't have to be incredible, but they can't be blurry and at like a 90-degree angle. You'd be amazed how many listings, like the place just looks filthy or ratty, or it's impossible to see what's going on, or there's no lights on, or the photo is flipped 90 degrees. Like simple things like that can make your place seem welcoming, and more important, just make it seem like you care. Because, if you're trying to get in the head of a prospective guest, they see that you haven't bothered to put up good photos. They'll think, oh, you're not going to bother to produce a nice experience or a nice stay as well. Also, be incredibly descriptive and also friendly in your listing. Some listings I find are kind of standoffish or robotic, and I think by kind of injecting your own personality into your listing, it's really helpful, because again, like what a lot of people want is your personality and an experience that's different from a sterile hotel. You'll find that as a host, half of what your reviews are about isn't about your place, it's about you. And, you being your best self and showing people your personality is really important, both for getting in bookings, but also making sure that the guests are satisfied with their stay.
Wow, that's great advice. I definitely agree with everything you said. And I want to go back to one thing you said. You said when you start off, you want to lower your prices. You want to make it competitive to compensate for the fact that you don't have a lot of reviews and you don't have a good reputation on Airbnb yet. And I think that's very good advice. My question is, how do you determine your prices right now?
Sure. It's, I think the best thing to do is kind of browse around your neighborhood and see what comparable apartments are going for. And you can't really just take what they're going for. You have to see what they're going for, but also which ones are actually getting bookings. Because if something is going for a really high price, but there's no reviews listed for it, or their calendar is totally unbooked, well, that tells you something. So you kind of have to just poke around the neighborhood and see how booked are calendars at different price points, and then kind of work with it there. And I think one thing that's also helpful to do is change your pricing over time. So, obviously, if you're talking about something 4 months from now, you have more time to find a guest for it at any price point. So what I like to do is, raise my price by just like a couple dollars, not much, for further out bookings, and then lower them as we get closer and they remain unbooked. That way you kind of can, make them more appealing to people when you yourself don't have as much time to book them.
And do you adjust your prices for seasonality, maybe day of the week versus weekends, or special events like Christmas, New Year's, or when there's a big event going on in town?
Yeah, I don't really do it for weekends because most of my guests are, staying for about a week in total or so, and I don't typically have just like weekend guests. That's a New York thing. If you're dealing with certain locations, you're getting a lot of weekend guests. So certainly like maybe Las Vegas or somewhere that's primarily a weekend spot, like the Hamptons, like those people will definitely be able to raise their prices for the weekend, but I kind of keep them consistent from day of the week. I do raise them a little bit, really not much. Like $3 or $4, and for certain holidays that a lot of people come to New York for, as well as peak season. The only really down season in New York is like January, February. New York, what's good about New York is there's always people coming to New York. It's not a seasonal destination. And you have people who are coming for vacations, but also for business. And so you have people constantly looking for places in New York, which is really makes it a uniquely great place to be an Airbnb host. January and February tend to be a little bit slower, so you do need to lower your rates a little bit then, but not by too much.
Have you heard about the pricing apps that recently are becoming more popular, like Beyond Pricing and Everbooked?
Tell me about those. What do they do?
So basically, they directly connect to your Airbnb listing and they update your prices with the optimal prices, and they calculate this based on demand that they see for other Airbnb listings, as well as flight data, hotel bookings, and all sorts of other factors. They specialize in calculating those optimal prices. They have like statisticians and data engineers and data analysts and all those people who are really smart. And that's all they do. They calculate prices and they automatically update your listing every single day.
And I use Beyond Pricing for my listing in LA, and at this point too, because I think it's still technically beta in the beta version, but it's completely free and it's awesome. I can't tell you already. It takes all the work away, and it's definitely in certain cases priced higher than I would have, and I've still gotten requests and bookings. It's been fantastic.
I'll definitely give that a shot.
Yeah, and actually, I talk to the CDO quite often, and of Beyond Pricing, which is what I use, and we have a special code. It's GP4, as in the number 4, and then YP, so abbreviation of Get Paid for Your Pad. And you can get 3 months for free. And what's
okay? I'm going to enter this right now. Say your code one more time.
GP4YP.
Okay.
So basically, what you can also do, for those who want to check it out, they have a demo section. So you don't even have to sign up. You can literally just put in your Airbnb URL, press the demo button, and you can see the prices that they would recommend. But like Josefa said, what's really cool about it is that you never have to worry about updating your prices anymore. Because what used to happen to me sometimes is I would update my prices for the next couple months, but then I forget to update them for like 5 or 6 months out. And then somebody would book my place for New Year's, and I forgot to raise the prices. And in Amsterdam, you can charge double, if not more, around New Year's and Christmas. So I had to decline the booking because I forgot to update my prices, and I felt kind of stupid about that. Anyway,
give that a shot.
Yeah, you should give it a try. It's pretty convenient, and I'm definitely making more money now because of it. All right, so Seth, thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome talking. We've been going for quite a while, and I'm sure we can continue for a few more hours if we have the time. But thank you so much for being on the show, and good luck with your listing. And of course, Josefa, it was good to have you back as well.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
And for all the listeners, of course, every Monday there's a new episode. We'll put up the show notes for this episode at getpaidforyourpet.com/podcast, where you can also find all the other 68 episodes that we've had so far. We're almost at 1 year, not quite, but definitely have some cool episodes coming up as well. So thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Get paid for your pet. 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 Get